What would you do if a police officer wrongfully accused your child of a crime she didn't commit? And how would you react if that same officer, filled with prejudice, realized he'd made the biggest mistake of his life? In a quiet town, a young black girl is arrested by a cop who believes she's guilty just by the way she looks. But when he discovers the truth, it sends him down a path he never expected. One that will challenge everything he thought he knew about justice, community, and himself. What happens next will leave you questioning how we see one another and how far someone can go to right their wrongs. Before we get started with today's story, share where you're tuning in from down in the comments. And be sure to subscribe so you never miss out on our newest content. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the row of trees that lined Broad Street, casting long shadows over the small town of Alderwood, Missouri. Officer Jake Hardin leaned back in his patrol car, one hand on the steering wheel, the other tapping the edge of his radio. He'd been patrolling these streets for years, and tonight felt no different. The quiet hum of the streetlights coming on signaled the beginning of another uneventful shift. He loved this town, loved the feeling of control it gave him. In his mind, he was the last line of defense in a world spiraling out of control. He had a reputation for being thorough, firm, and unbending, the kind of cop who didn't allow excuses. In Jake's eyes, Alderwood needed that, and he was more than happy to fill the role. As he drove past the local convenience store, something caught his eye. A little girl, maybe 8 or 9, sitting on the bench outside. Her legs swung back and forth as she nibbled on a small pack of crackers. She wore a pink dress that looked slightly worn, her dark curls tied back into a neat ponytail. She looked nervous, glancing around as if she didn't belong there. Jake frowned. There were no adults with her. Something about the situation felt off. He pulled his patrol car to a slow stop across the street and sat there for a moment, observing. His cop instincts kicked in. A child, alone, near a store. What if she'd stolen something? Kids, after all, weren't above a little troublemaking. His grip tightened on the wheel. He'd seen this too many times before. Kids getting into trouble. Parents nowhere to be found. He felt the familiar sense of duty rise in his chest. It was his job to keep the peace, and if that meant stopping a potential problem before it got out of hand, so be it. Jake swung open the door of his patrol car and stepped out. His boots hit the pavement with a determined thud as he walked purposefully toward the little girl. She looked up at him as his shadow fell over her, her eyes wide, unsure. "Hey there," Jake said, keeping his voice steady, though there was an edge to it. "Where are your parents?" The girl swallowed hard, clutching the pack of crackers a little tighter. "My mom's inside," she said, her voice soft. "She's shopping. She said I could wait here." Jake glanced at the store behind her. The evening rush had filled the place with people pushing shopping carts and kids darting between aisles. There was no sign of anyone looking for her. "And those crackers," he continued, nodding toward the package in her hands. "Did you pay for those?" The girl's eyes widened. "My mom gave them to me," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't take anything, I promise." Jake's suspicion deepened. The girl seemed too nervous, her gaze flickering back toward the entrance of the store, as if waiting for someone. He crossed his arms over his chest, towering over her. "Let's be honest here," Jake said, his tone firm. "Did you take them from the store without paying?" Tears welled up in the little girl's eyes. "No, sir," she whispered, shaking her head. But Jake had already made up his mind. He bent down and grabbed her arm, pulling her up from the bench. "Come on," he said, his voice a little sharper now. "We'll wait for your mom inside. You can explain this to her there." The girl started to cry, her small body shaking with fear. "Please, I didn't do anything wrong," she sobbed. "My mom's coming back, I promise." Jake didn't let go. His job wasn't about being soft or second-guessing his instincts. It was about enforcing the rules. He led her toward the store entrance, his grip firm on her arm, ignoring the stares of the people around them. Inside, the store was a flurry of activity. The hum of voices, the beeping of registers, and the clatter of shopping carts created a steady rhythm. Caroline Grant was in the middle of checking her list, trying to grab a few more items before heading to the checkout. Her mind was on the dinner she was planning and the work emails she needed to catch up on later that night. She glanced at her watch. She didn't have much time left. A commotion at the front of the store caught her attention. She looked up, her breath catching in her throat as she saw Jake leading her daughter, Mia, inside. Her heart dropped. "Mia?" Caroline rushed toward them, her bags forgotten in the cart. She knelt down in front of her daughter, wiping away the tears that streamed down the little girl's cheeks. "What's going on? What happened?" Mia threw herself into her mother's arms, sobbing. "Mommy, I didn't do anything. The man thinks I stole the crackers." Caroline looked up at Jake, fury burning in her eyes. "She didn't steal anything," she said, her voice tight with anger. "I gave her those crackers. What do you think you're doing?" Jake stood his ground. "I saw a child sitting alone outside the store with snacks. She seemed nervous. I had reason to believe she might have taken them without paying." Caroline rose to her feet, her hands clenched into fists. "You had no reason to lay a hand on my daughter," she snapped. "She's 9 years old, for God's sake. She was just waiting for me." A small crowd had begun to gather near the entrance, drawn by the raised voices. People whispered to each other, their faces a mixture of concern and confusion. Jake could feel their eyes on him, but he remained unflinching. In his mind, he was just doing his job. Caroline's voice shook with rage. "Take your hand off my daughter right now! This is unacceptable!" For the first time, Jake hesitated. He could see the fear in Mia's eyes, the anger in her mother's, and the crowd closing in, murmuring among themselves. But admitting he was wrong, that didn't come easily for him. Instead, he doubled down. "Ma'am, I was following protocol. It's my duty to investigate suspicious behavior." "Suspicious?" Caroline shouted. "She's a child, a scared little girl waiting for her mom. That's suspicious to you?" More people had pulled out their phones, recording the interaction. Jake's face flushed, the weight of the moment beginning to sink in. But he wasn't about to back down in front of an audience. His voice was clipped as he replied, "I'm just trying to keep the community safe." "Safe?" Caroline's voice cracked with disbelief. "By treating innocent children like criminals, my daughter isn't a threat to you or anyone else." Jake opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a voice from the crowd cut through the tension. "This is wrong," someone said. "Let the kid go." By now, the store's manager had arrived, along with a couple of other employees. Jake stood there, silent, the crowd pressing in around him. He felt the weight of judgment from every side, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt passed through him. Maybe he'd gone too far. Maybe this wasn't as clear-cut as he'd thought. Caroline knelt down to Mia again, brushing the tears from her face. "It's okay, sweetie," she whispered. "I'm here now. You're safe." Jake released his grip on Mia's arm, stepping back, but the damage had already been done. He could feel the shift in the air, the way the crowd looked at him, the way the mother's voice trembled with fury and fear. His mind raced, trying to find a way to justify his actions, but the words stuck in his throat. Caroline stood up, her eyes blazing. "I'm filing a formal complaint against you," she said, her voice icy. "This is unacceptable." Jake clenched his jaw, fighting to keep his composure. "You have the right to do that," he replied stiffly. "But I was just doing my job." Caroline didn't respond. She turned and led Mia out of the store, leaving Jake standing there alone, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. As the days passed, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. He tried to push it aside, focusing on his work, telling himself that he'd been right, that he was just keeping the peace. But the image of Mia's tear-streaked face haunted him, and the whispers around town grew louder. It wasn't long before the complaint made its way to the police chief. Jake found himself sitting in a cold, sterile office, facing the stern gaze of his superior. "Jake," the chief said, his voice heavy with disappointment. We've had a formal complaint filed against you. Racial profiling. A little girl, Jake. What were you thinking?" Jake's mouth went dry. He hadn't thought about it like that. It wasn't about race, was it? It was about protocol, about suspicion. But the chief wasn't buying it. "You're suspended until further notice," the chief continued, his tone final. "There's an investigation underway. You'll need to attend sensitivity training, and depending on the outcome, there could be more consequences." Jake nodded, numb. He left the office in a daze, his world spinning. The badge that had once given him purpose, made him feel like he was in control, now felt like a burden he could barely carry. The sensitivity training was supposed to be routine, something Jake figured he could breeze through. But as the days wore on, something began to shift inside him. The stories he heard, the examples they discussed, it all started to sound uncomfortably familiar. He thought back to Mia, to the assumptions he'd made about her. What if he'd been wrong? What if his instincts weren't as infallible as he'd always believed? By the end of the training, Jake wasn't the same man who had walked in. He'd been forced to confront something ugly inside himself, something he hadn't wanted to see. But the real test came when he was sent to volunteer at a local community center as part of his suspension. Jake had never been the kind of person to spend much time in community outreach programs. He saw his role as enforcing the law, not making friends. But now, with no other choice, he found himself at the doors of the local food bank, wearing civilian clothes and feeling more out of place than ever. The moment he walked in, his eyes locked onto a familiar face. Caroline was there, serving food to the line of families that stretched out the door, and beside her, Mia, smiling and helping with the trays. Jake's heart sank. Caroline spotted him too, her expression hardening as she recognized him. Jake could see the tension in her body, the protective way she moved closer to her daughter. She didn't say anything, but the message was clear. "You're not welcome here." Jake spent the rest of the day avoiding eye contact, keeping his head down as he carried boxes of canned goods and swept the floor. But the weight of the guilt never left him. Days turned into weeks, and Jake kept showing up, doing the work, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he could prove he wasn't the man they thought he was. Little by little, he began to see the community in a different light. He saw the struggles these families faced, the challenges they dealt with every day. He saw how hard people worked just to get by, and he realized that he'd been blind to it for so long. One afternoon, as Jake was stacking boxes in the back room, he overheard a conversation between two volunteers. "Caroline and Mia? Yeah, they've been helping out here for years," one of them said. "Caroline started after her mom passed. She's been giving back ever since. Mia's always here too. Sweet kid, smart as a whip." Jake froze. The little girl he had accused of stealing, the child he had handcuffed, was a regular volunteer at the food bank, helping people in need. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He had been so wrong, so terribly wrong. Jake's hands trembled slightly as he placed the box down. His mind replayed the conversation he'd just overheard. Caroline and Mia weren't just some random family passing through town. They were pillars of this community, working tirelessly to help others. And Mia, how could he have missed it? She was just a child, innocent and kind, and he had treated her like a criminal. Jake's stomach churned with guilt. How many others had he misjudged in the past, blinded by his own assumptions and biases? That evening, Jake sat alone in his small apartment. The glow from the streetlight outside barely penetrated the dark room. He stared at the blank wall, his mind swirling with thoughts he couldn't quiet. He had spent years patrolling these streets, thinking he was the protector of this town, the one who kept order. But now, he wondered if he had ever really understood the people he was supposed to serve. For years, he had seen things in black and white, good or bad, right or wrong. But the more he reflected on what had happened with Mia, the more he realized that life wasn't as simple as he had always believed. People weren't just problems to be solved or threats to be neutralized. They were human beings with stories, struggles, and complexities that he had never bothered to see. Jake stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. He couldn't sit with these thoughts any longer. He needed to do something. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, not sure where he was going, but knowing he couldn't stay locked in his own mind any longer. The next day, Jake returned to the community center, unsure of what to expect. He hadn't seen Caroline or Mia since overhearing that conversation, and part of him hoped they wouldn't be there today. But as he stepped inside, there they were, standing behind the serving counter, smiles on their faces as they dished out food to the line of people waiting. Jake swallowed hard, trying to push down the knot of guilt that had lodged itself in his chest. He couldn't avoid this forever. If he was going to face the consequences of his actions, he needed to face them head on. He made his way to the back of the room, grabbing a broom and starting on the floor. His plan was simple: stay out of sight, keep his head down, and do the work. But as he swept, he couldn't help but glance up every now and then, watching Caroline and Mia. The way they worked together, the way Mia's face lit up when she made someone smile, it was clear that this was more than just a charity for them. It was their way of giving back, of connecting with the people around them. Jake's eyes flicked back to the floor, his mind racing. He had to make things right. But how? An apology seemed like too little, too late. But what else could he do? Before he could think it through, Caroline approached him, her face expressionless. "Officer Hardin," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Can we talk?" Jake's heart pounded in his chest, but he nodded, setting the broom aside. "Of course," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Caroline led him to a small room at the back of the center, away from the bustle of the main area. As soon as the door closed behind them, she turned to face him, her arms crossed over her chest. "I know why you're here," she said, her voice steady. "You're trying to make up for what you did to Mia, and I appreciate that you're trying, but I need to hear it from you. Do you understand what you did wrong?" Jake felt the weight of her words settle over him. He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. I made assumptions," he began, his voice shaking. "I saw Mia sitting alone, and I jumped to conclusions. I thought she was up to no good, and I didn't stop to think about what was really happening. I didn't listen to her when she tried to explain. I let my own biases cloud my judgment, and I hurt her. I hurt both of you." Caroline's expression didn't soften, but she didn't interrupt him either. Jake pressed on. "I was wrong, Caroline. So wrong. And I know that saying sorry doesn't fix what I did. But I am sorry. I've been thinking about it every day since it happened, and I need you to know that I'm going to do better. I don't want to be that kind of officer. I don't want to be that kind of person." For a moment, the room was silent. Jake stood there, his heart in his throat, waiting for Caroline's response. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, but still steady. "I appreciate your honesty," she said. "But it's not me you owe an apology to. It's Mia." Jake nodded, swallowing hard. "I know, and I'll apologize to her too. But I need to ask, what can I do? How can I make things right?" Caroline looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Finally, she let out a sigh. "Actions speak louder than words, Officer Hardin," she said. "You want to make things right? Prove it. Show us that you've changed. Keep showing up. Keep doing the work. That's how you make things right." Jake nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and guilt wash over him. He hadn't expected forgiveness. He didn't deserve it. But the fact that Caroline was willing to give him a chance to prove himself felt like a lifeline he hadn't known he needed. Over the next few weeks, Jake did just that. He showed up at the community center every day, helping wherever he could. He worked quietly, doing his best to stay out of the way, but always keeping an eye on Mia and Caroline. He still hadn't worked up the courage to speak to Mia directly, but he was determined to earn her trust. As time passed, Jake began to notice subtle changes in the way the people around him treated him. At first, there had been wary glances and whispered conversations when he walked into the room. But as the days turned into weeks, those glances softened and the whispers faded. People began to greet him with nods, and some even stopped to chat with him while he worked. One afternoon, as Jake was restocking shelves in the pantry, Mia approached him, her hands clasped behind her back. Jake's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment he had been dreading and hoping for. "Hi," Mia said softly, her eyes wide and curious. Jake set down the box he was holding and knelt down so he was at eye level with her. "Hi, Mia," he said, his voice gentle. Mia shifted from foot to foot, her gaze flickering between Jake and the floor. "Mom said you're here to help," she said after a moment. Jake nodded. "That's right. I'm here to help." Mia bit her lip, then looked up at him with those big, innocent eyes that had haunted Jake for so long. "Are you really sorry for what you did?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake felt his chest tighten with emotion. He swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes, Mia," he said, his voice thick with guilt. "I'm really, really sorry. I didn't listen to you when I should have, and I didn't treat you the way you deserved to be treated. I'm sorry." Mia stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "I forgive you." Jake blinked, taken aback by her words. He hadn't expected forgiveness, especially not from Mia. But hearing her say those words lifted a weight off his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. "Thank you," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Mia." Mia gave him a small smile, then turned and skipped back to where Caroline was waiting. Jake watched her go, a strange sense of peace settling over him. He knew he still had a long way to go, but in that moment, he felt like he had taken the first real step toward making things right. Jake's transformation didn't stop at the community center. As he continued to volunteer, he found himself becoming more involved in the lives of the people he served. He listened to their stories, learned about their struggles, and started to see the world through their eyes. He realized how much he had missed over the years, how many people he had judged unfairly, how many opportunities he had missed to make a real difference. One day, as Jake was helping to organize a food drive, Caroline approached him with a clipboard in hand. "Officer Hardin," she said, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "I think it's time we took this to the next level." Jake raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Caroline handed him the clipboard. "We're planning a community outreach event," she explained. "We want to bring people together, residents, police officers, everyone. It's about building bridges, about showing that we're all on the same side, and we'd like you to help us organize it." Jake stared at the clipboard in his hands, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and disbelief. "Me?" he asked, his voice tinged with surprise. "You want me to help?" Caroline nodded. "You've been doing the work, Officer Hardin," she said. "You've shown us that you're serious about making things right. Now it's time to take the next step." Jake felt a surge of gratitude. This was more than just a chance to make amends. It was an opportunity to truly make a difference. He smiled, feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. "I'm in," he said, his voice steady. "Let's do this." As the weeks passed, Jake threw himself into planning the event. He worked closely with Caroline and the other volunteers, organizing activities, setting up meetings with local leaders, and reaching out to the police department to get them involved. He knew it wouldn't be easy. There was still a lot of mistrust between the community and the police, but he was determined to make it work. The day of the event finally arrived, and the park was buzzing with excitement. Families from all over town had gathered for the community picnic, and for the first time in a long time, Jake felt like he belonged. He walked through the park, greeting people, shaking hands, and chatting with the kids who were running around playing games. As the afternoon wore on, Jake found himself standing near the dunk tank, watching as a group of kids lined up to take their turn at dunking one of the police officers. Mia was at the front of the line, a mischievous grin on her face as she aimed the ball at the target. Jake couldn't help but smile as he watched her. This was what it was all about, bringing people together, building trust, and showing that they were all part of the same community. The sun began its slow descent as the sky turned a soft orange. Laughter echoed across the park, blending with the sounds of kids chasing each other and parents chatting over picnic tables. The community picnic had been a success, far beyond what Jake had imagined. He moved through the crowd, watching people he'd once viewed as strangers, now interacting with officers and volunteers alike, the tension that had once hung in the air nowhere to be found. Mia, her curly hair bouncing as she ran, sprinted toward Jake with a huge smile on her face. Her joy was infectious, and for a moment, Jake's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and relief. After everything, this was what mattered: trust, laughter, connection. "You did it," Mia said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "You really helped put all this together." Jake chuckled, shaking his head. "Nah, kid, I just helped. It was your mom and all these other folks who made it happen." Mia grinned, wiping sweat from her forehead as she caught her breath. "But you're part of it too. That's what Mom says. She said you've been doing a really good job." Jake's smile faltered for a second as he looked down at the young girl who had once been terrified of him. Her forgiveness had been like a gift he didn't think he deserved. It wasn't that long ago that he had misjudged her so badly, yet here she was, not just forgiving him, but celebrating with him. "Thanks, Mia," Jake said softly, bending down to meet her eye level. "That means more than you know." Mia giggled, her earlier energy returning. "Come on, Jake. I want to show you the face painting booth. Mom's over there with the other volunteers." Jake stood up, brushing the grass from his knees as Mia grabbed his hand and led him across the park. As they approached the face painting booth, Jake's gaze fell on Caroline, who was talking with some of the other mothers, her face radiant with the satisfaction of a day well spent. She spotted Jake and Mia and waved them over. "You're just in time," Caroline said with a playful smile. "I was about to volunteer you for the dunk tank again." Jake chuckled. "I think I've been dunked enough times for one day. But if it makes the kids happy, I'll do it again." Caroline raised an eyebrow, laughing. "Don't tempt them. They'll take you up on that offer in a heartbeat." The two of them stood there for a moment, watching Mia run off to join her friends. For a while, neither of them spoke. The atmosphere between them had changed, no longer charged with the tension and anger that had marked their earlier interactions. Instead, there was a quiet understanding, a shared sense of purpose. "I didn't think I'd ever see a day like this," Caroline said softly, her eyes scanning the crowd. "It's been a long time coming." Jake nodded, his mind drifting back to all the moments that had led them here, the mistakes he'd made, the biases he'd carried, and the work he'd put in to try and make things right. "It has," he agreed. "But we're here now. That's what matters." Caroline glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "You've changed, Jake. I didn't believe it at first. I thought you were just trying to save face, maybe hoping we'd forget what happened. But I see it now. You're not the same man who put my daughter in handcuffs." Jake swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. "I'm not," he admitted. "Or at least, I don't want to be. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, Caroline. More than I care to admit. But this, what happened with Mia, that was a wake-up call. I needed to face some hard truths about myself, and I'm still learning. I'll probably be learning for the rest of my life." Caroline smiled faintly, her eyes softening. "We all are. None of us have it all figured out. But what matters is that you're trying. You're showing up, day after day, and that means something." Jake looked down at the ground, unsure of what to say. He wasn't used to receiving praise, especially not from someone he had hurt so deeply. But hearing those words from Caroline, someone who had every right to despise him, meant more than he could express. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "That means a lot coming from you." Caroline nodded, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer before she turned her attention back to the picnic. "You know," she said after a pause, "there's something I've been meaning to talk to you about." Jake raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. "What's that?" Caroline hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her words carefully. "The food bank," she said finally. "We've been running it for years, but we're starting to get overwhelmed. The need in this community is growing, and we're struggling to keep up. I was wondering if you'd be interested in helping out more regularly, not just volunteering here and there, but really stepping up. We could use someone like you, someone who knows this community and cares about it." Jake blinked, taken aback by the offer. He had never considered himself someone who could make a real difference in the community. His job had always been about law and order, about keeping the peace. But now, standing here, surrounded by people he had come to care about, he realized that there was more to being an officer, more to being a member of this town, than just enforcing the rules. "I'd be honored," he said, his voice steady. "Whatever you need, I'm there." Caroline smiled, a genuine warmth in her eyes. "Good. We could use someone with your skills and your heart." Jake felt a surge of pride at her words. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself, something that truly mattered. As the weeks passed, Jake's role in the community grew. He spent more and more time at the food bank, helping organize drives, distribute supplies, and coordinate with local businesses to secure donations. He was no longer just Officer Hardin, the stern, no-nonsense cop who patrolled the streets. He had become Jake, the man who was working to heal the wounds he had caused and build trust in a community that had once feared him. His fellow officers noticed the change too. At the station, word had spread about Jake's involvement in the community, and while some were skeptical at first, others were inspired by his transformation. One by one, officers started volunteering at the food bank, joining Jake in his efforts to make a positive impact. At first, there were whispers behind his back, murmurs of doubt about whether Jake's change of heart was genuine. But as time went on, those whispers faded. Jake's actions spoke louder than any words could, and soon, even the most skeptical officers were taking notice. One afternoon, as Jake was finishing up a shift at the food bank, Officer Maya Rodriguez approached him, her arms crossed and a smirk on her face. "I've got to hand it to you, Jake," she said, her tone teasing but not unkind. "I didn't think you had it in you." Jake raised an eyebrow, chuckling softly. "Had what in me?" "The whole community outreach thing," Maya replied, leaning against the doorway. "You were always the by-the-book guy. I didn't think you'd be the type to roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty." Jake shrugged, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "People can surprise you." Maya laughed, shaking her head. "Yeah, you're full of surprises lately. But I'll admit, it's working. You've got some of the other guys talking about getting involved. Maybe you're onto something." Jake nodded, feeling a sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about proving anything to his fellow officers. It was about doing what was right. But if his actions could inspire others to think differently, to approach their work with more empathy, then that was a win. "Thanks, Maya," Jake said, his tone sincere. "But this isn't about me. It's about the people we're supposed to serve." Maya's smirk softened into a genuine smile. "I hear you, and I respect that. Keep it up, Jake. The station could use more people like you." As Maya turned to leave, Jake stood there for a moment, reflecting on how far he had come. A few months ago, he would never have imagined himself in this position, respected not just for his ability to enforce the law, but for his commitment to the community. It was a humbling realization, and one that filled him with a deep sense of purpose. The following week, Caroline and Mia invited Jake over for dinner. It was a quiet Sunday evening, the air crisp as the first hints of autumn began to settle over Alderwood. Jake arrived at their house, feeling a mix of nerves and gratitude. He hadn't expected to be welcomed into their home, not after everything that had happened. But here he was, standing on their doorstep, feeling like he was about to cross a threshold that meant more than just a meal. Caroline opened the door, her warm smile putting him at ease. "Come on in," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "Dinner's almost ready." Jake stepped inside, taking in the cozy, lived-in feel of the house. The smell of home-cooked food filled the air, and he could hear Mia giggling in the other room, playing with her toys. "You've got a nice place," Jake said, glancing around. Caroline smiled, a touch of pride in her eyes. "Thanks. It's home." As they sat down to eat, the conversation flowed easily. Mia chattered excitedly about school, telling Jake all about her favorite subjects and the friends she had made. Caroline shared stories about her work at the food bank, and Jake listened, feeling more connected to them with each passing minute. At one point, as they were finishing up dessert, Caroline leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You know," she said softly, "I've been thinking about that day at the store, about how everything could have turned out so differently." Jake's stomach tightened at the mention of the incident, but he didn't interrupt. "I was so angry at you," Caroline continued, her voice steady. "I didn't think I'd ever be able to forgive you for what you did to Mia, and part of me still holds on to that anger, if I'm being honest." Jake nodded, understanding. He didn't expect the anger to just disappear. It was justified. "But then I see you here," Caroline said, her gaze meeting his. "I see the work you've done, the way you've committed yourself to this community, and I realize that people can change. You've shown us that." Jake swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. "I don't know if I deserve your forgiveness," he said quietly, "but I'm going to keep trying to earn it." Caroline smiled, a small, gentle smile that carried more weight than Jake could put into words. "You already have, Jake. You already have." The weeks stretched into months, and Jake's role in the community continued to evolve. He became a familiar face at the food bank, the park, and local events. People who had once avoided him now greeted him warmly, and kids who had once seen him as a figure of authority now saw him as someone they could trust. But the most significant change was within Jake himself. He had learned to listen, to really listen to the people around him, to understand their fears, their struggles, their hopes. He no longer saw the world in black and white. Instead, he saw the shades of gray, the complexity of human lives, and the importance of empathy in his work as an officer. One day, as Jake walked through the town square, he overheard a conversation between two teenagers sitting on a bench. They were talking about the upcoming community cleanup event, an initiative Jake had helped organize with the local youth. "That Officer Harden guy?" one of the teens said. "He's actually pretty cool. My little brother got sick, and he dropped off food for us last week. Can you believe that?" The other teen nodded. "Yeah, he's been helping at the food bank for a while now. I heard he's the one who started the outreach program with the cops." Jake smiled to himself as he walked past, his heart light. This was the real work. Not just keeping the peace, but building something better, something stronger. A community where people looked out for each other, where trust was earned, and where second chances were given. The seasons had changed by the time Jake truly felt the shift within himself. It wasn't just the passing days or the tasks he took on at the food bank. It was the look in people's eyes, the way they greeted him now, without that edge of fear or mistrust. More than anything, it was the way Mia smiled at him whenever she saw him, full of genuine warmth and affection. That smile had become his barometer for how far he'd come. But he knew that his work was far from over. Trust was fragile, and the weight of his past actions would always loom behind him. Yet, with each passing day, he felt more connected to this town, to its people, than he had ever felt in his years patrolling its streets. The badge on his chest, which once symbolized authority and enforcement, now felt like a symbol of responsibility, one he would never again take lightly. The community outreach program had grown too. What started as a small food drive had expanded into monthly events, cleanup projects, mentoring sessions for local kids, and workshops where police officers and residents could come together to talk, openly and honestly. The tensions that had once simmered under the surface in Alderwood seemed to ease, little by little. One Saturday afternoon, as Jake was packing up supplies after a successful youth workshop, he spotted Officer Tom Landry across the park, talking with a group of teenagers. Jake couldn't help but smile. Tom had been one of the officers most resistant to change. He had scoffed at Jake's initial involvement in the community center, dismissing it as soft policing. But now, here he was, engaging with the kids, listening to their stories, and offering advice without a hint of judgment. Tom caught Jake's eye and waved him over. "Hey, Hardin," he called out, his tone surprisingly light. "Come meet these kids. They're full of ideas for the next cleanup." Jake strolled over, still amazed by how much things had changed, not just for him, but for everyone. As he approached the group, one of the teenagers, Corey, a tall, lanky kid who had a habit of wearing a baseball cap backward, grinned at him. "Officer Jake," Corey said, offering a mock salute. "We were just telling Officer Landry that we're thinking of organizing a basketball tournament next month. Get some of the cops to play against us. You in?" Jake chuckled. "As long as you go easy on us old guys." Corey laughed, but there was no edge to it, just camaraderie. "Nah, we're taking you down." The banter continued for a while, lighthearted and genuine. It felt natural, the way it should have always been. The walls that had once existed between Jake and these kids, between the officers and the community, had started to crumble. It wasn't perfect, not by any means, but it was progress. And that was what mattered. Later that evening, as Jake sat on his porch, the quiet of the night settling around him, he thought about how far he'd come. He wasn't the same man who had pulled Mia from that bench outside the store, convinced she was up to no good. He had been forced to confront his own prejudices, his own narrow view of the world, and it hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. As his thoughts drifted, Jake's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, surprised to see a message from Caroline. Caroline. "Hey Jake, I wanted to thank you again for all your help today. The kids really seem to look up to you. And I know Mia does too. I don't think I ever told you this, but she's been talking about wanting to be a police officer when she grows up. She says she wants to help people, like you do." Jake stared at the screen for a long moment, his heart swelling with emotion. Mia wanted to be a cop? He hadn't expected that. After everything he had put her through, after the fear and confusion he had caused, the idea that she saw him as someone to look up to felt almost surreal. He typed out a response, his fingers trembling slightly. "Jake. Thanks, Caroline. That means more to me than you know. Mia's an incredible kid. She's going to do great things, whatever she decides to do." The next message came quickly. Caroline. "She's lucky to have someone like you in her life, Jake. We all are." Jake didn't respond right away. He sat there, staring at the message, letting the words sink in. He had spent so long trying to make amends, trying to prove that he was more than the mistakes he'd made. But in that moment, he realized that he didn't need to prove anything anymore. He had already earned their trust. He had already shown them who he truly was. And for the first time in a long while, Jake allowed himself to feel proud. A few weeks later, the community held its biggest event yet, a block party that spanned several streets and drew in hundreds of residents. There was music, food, games, and for the first time, a real sense of unity between the police department and the people they served. Jake stood near one of the food stands, watching as families mingled with officers, laughing and chatting as though the barriers that had once divided them had never existed. He caught sight of Tom Landry tossing a football with some kids, while Maya Rodriguez helped a group of teenagers paint a mural on the side of a building. Everywhere Jake looked, there was connection, understanding, and something that felt a lot like hope. As Jake made his way through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging smiles, he spotted Mia standing near the dunk tank with a group of kids. She waved him over, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Jake!" she called out, her voice full of excitement. "You gotta get in the dunk tank again. Everyone's waiting to dunk you." Jake laughed, holding up his hands in mock protest. "Again? I've already been dunked 3 times today." Mia grinned, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "One more time. Come on, it's for charity." Jake sighed dramatically, but the truth was, he didn't mind at all. This was what it was all about, being part of something bigger than himself, being there for the people who needed him, and showing them that he wasn't just Officer Hardin anymore. He was Jake, their neighbor, their friend. As he climbed into the dunk tank, he saw Caroline standing nearby, watching with a smile. She gave him a thumbs up, and Jake couldn't help but smile back. "All right, Mia," he called out, settling into the tank. "Let's see what you've got." Mia stepped up to the line, her face serious as she wound up her arm. She tossed the ball, and with a loud splash, Jake was plunged into the cold water, the crowd erupting into laughter and cheers. As he climbed out, dripping wet but grinning from ear to ear, he felt something shift inside him. The guilt, the shame, the weight of his past mistakes. They didn't disappear, but they didn't control him anymore. He had faced them, owned them, and worked to make things right. And in doing so, he had found something he hadn't realized he was missing, a sense of belonging, not just as an officer, but as a member of this community. The sun began to set, casting a warm golden light over the streets as the block party started to wind down. People packed up their booths, kids reluctantly left the game stations, and the music grew softer, signaling the end of the day's festivities. Jake found himself standing at the edge of the park, looking out over the town he had come to love in a new way. Alderwood wasn't perfect. It had its challenges, its struggles, but it was a place where people cared for one another, where second chances were given, and where change was possible. As he stood there, taking it all in, he felt a small hand slip into his. He looked down to see Mia standing beside him, her wide eyes gazing up at him with admiration. "You did good today, Jake," she said, her voice quiet but full of sincerity. Jake squeezed her hand gently, his heart full. "So did you, kiddo." They stood there for a moment, watching the last few rays of sunlight disappear behind the horizon. The air was cool, the sounds of laughter and conversation fading into the background, and for the first time in a long time, Jake felt at peace. In the months that followed, Jake's role in Alderwood continued to grow. The community outreach program became a staple in the town, with more officers getting involved and more residents feeling comfortable engaging with law enforcement. The bond between the police department and the community grew stronger, and the divisions that had once felt so insurmountable began to fade. But for Jake, it wasn't about the accolades or the recognition. It wasn't about being seen as the hero or the one who fixed everything. It was about doing what was right, about showing up for the people who needed him, and about proving, through his actions, that he had changed. One evening, after a long day of volunteering at the food bank, Jake returned home to find a letter in his mailbox. It was from Mia. He opened it, his heart racing as he unfolded the piece of paper. "Dear Jake, thank you for always being there for me and my mom. You've shown me what it really means to help people. I know I used to be scared of you, but now I know that you're one of the good ones. I want to be a police officer just like you when I grow up, because I want to help people the way you do. Love, Mia." Jake stared at the letter, his vision blurring as tears welled up in his eyes. He had come a long way, but hearing those words from Mia, that was everything. That was the true measure of his journey. He folded the letter carefully, placing it in his pocket, close to his heart. As he stood there, the weight of his past mistakes no longer felt like a burden, but a reminder. a reminder of the importance of growth, of empathy, and of the power of second chances. Jake Harden wasn't the same man who had once seen the world in black and white. He was someone who understood the shades of gray, who saw people for who they truly were, and who had learned, through hard lessons and deep reflection, that every person deserved respect, kindness, and the chance to be seen. And in the end, that was the greatest lesson of all.